thoughts may come. There may be an itch or a tickle that you want to scratch. Just let it all be there. No problem. And just keeping your attention on the knowing of sound. Again, sound is just arising, and ears receive sound, and ear consciousness perceives sound. There's no doing, just hearing. In all the sounds, the cars driving by, the fidget of the person behind you, the sound of your breath if it's audible. Noticing if there's a preference for some sounds over others. The next sound of the bell concludes this meditation. So for those of you who were not here last week, we had a lot of discussion about mindfulness and meditation, what it was, what it wasn't. There's a check right there. And we began the practice of meditation with this sound meditation. So that's, in 5 minutes, everything you missed. But I did want to take a minute and field any questions if you were here and you worked with it over the week and you had some comments or questions, or if you weren't here and this is all completely new and you have questions, now's the time.
Continuing from what I was experiencing last week, it was kind of like a peeling experience. And I got stuck because I was peeling and looking for quote, answer. And what happened is I kept getting, it's not this, it's not this. And I got frustrated because what is it? That's kind of where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
So, just wonder how to get that next leap or something.
Mm. So it's a good question to help me clarify, especially for those who are new to this practice or were not here last week. We talked a lot about insight and how the process of watching your thoughts or quieting your thoughts or doing any kind of mindful practice can lead to wisdom. And you noticed last week that when we did the sound meditation, you got some clarity around something. Mm-hmm. And that happens a lot. But it's not the goal. Mm-hmm. So you don't sit necessarily with an answer-oriented agenda. It's not that different than anything else where you're trying to think of something and you can't remember it and you can't remember it and you can't remember it and you say, all right, I'm just going to forget about it, and then the answer will come when I'm not trying to think about it. If you just sit and you intend to ruminate over a certain dilemma or question, then your mind isn't spacious and open and free to be available for insight to come.
So when it comes, it comes. If it doesn't come, enjoy the ride.
Right. When it doesn't come, the thing to do is to be aware of frustration arising. Mm-hmm. And what does frustration feel like? As you'll start to see as we go from week to week, I'm really simplifying it now, and we're just focusing on how to pay attention to one thing at a time. A few weeks from now, when all of the possible experiences are included, then really it's going to be a very flowing practice where whatever arises is what the focus of the meditation is. Mm-hmm. So like if you're sitting and you notice your thoughts wanting an answer, you notice that. And then if you notice not getting the answer leads to frustration, you notice frustration. And then maybe there's a curiosity about what frustration feels like in the body, and you notice the body sensations. Then maybe there's a noticing that you're not liking the way that feels in the body, or then trying to change the way that feels. So there's always one thing going on after the other after the other. It's a thought, it's a sensation, it's an emotion. They all trigger each other, and they're all happening all the time beyond our conscious awareness. And when we sit, we get to watch how one thing leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. And that's how wisdom develops. We see, when I want something, it leads to frustration. When frustration arises, it leads to sensation. When sensation arises, it becomes uncomfortable. And then I want to fix that. And then when I want to fix that, it either gets fixed or it doesn't. And I either feel good about myself or I don't. And it's just like this on and on process that never ends. And when you start to be able to watch it, you catch it from the beginning, and then you let go of all the things that would normally flow from that, all of which are leading you towards suffering. So the moment you sit and you notice, oh, I'm wanting an answer, the rest of it doesn't have to come, and then you'll just check back in with what's happening now. So that's where we're heading with this practice. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Remind me of what you said last week about wanting what we don't have and having what we don't want.
Yeah.
I got about 2/3.
That's most of it. So, what I said was that all of the suffering that we experience isn't necessarily from the conditions that we're subjected to. In fact, it's never about the conditions that we're subjected to. What was that movie with the Italian guy during World War II and his son? Do you guys know what I'm talking? Andy, you know.
Beautiful mind.
Beautiful Mind?
Life is beautiful.
No, Life is Beautiful.
No, life is beautiful.
Life is Beautiful.
And the guy won the Academy Award, he was kind of crazy, the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was very exuberant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen this movie, it's a beautiful movie about this, it's an Italian film. And this guy and his son are basically going through World War II. And he tries to keep his son from experiencing the trauma of what's happening to them. And so he's constantly making light of things and making games of everything. And you get the sense that his son is having a good time, even though he's in the middle of this war. And it's just such a beautiful example to me of how you can choose how you experience anything. And you can either be absolutely desperate and, full of despair and sorrow, or you can stay in control of your own emotional response. Now, granted, a war is a very, very, very challenging practice to still feel peaceful in. So we're lucky that maybe we have some footsteps that we don't like, or some heat that's uncomfortable, or we're not in the chair that we wish we were in, and it's not really that difficult. And then some of you might have experiences in your life that are quite difficult and create further challenges for your practice. But that's why we sit in a scenario like this, where the controls are fairly neutral and we can practice the reactivity of our mind. So that's a long intro to the answer to your question, which is the reasons why we do suffer are not the conditions in our life that we encounter, but our responses to those conditions. Generally, what we're doing is we're wanting something we don't have, or more of something that we have. We're not wanting something that we have. Like we have pain, we don't want pain. We have a little money, we want more money. Or we're losing something that we have, and we want to hold on to it. Somebody we care about is dying. So most of the ways that we suffer are around wanting or not wanting. And then there's another way that you raised last week, which was there's confusion. We do suffer sometimes out of confusion. Confusion about the way things actually are. We believe things to be other than they are, and being disconnected from truth is another form of suffering. So an example is that we believe that things might be permanent. We have a lot of money and we think that we're always going to have a lot of money. Or we have pain and we think we're always going to have pain. So having pain and believing that you're always going to have pain, that's kind of obvious how that could lead to suffering. But also, if you think you're always going to have money, it can lead to suffering if you lose that money. And it also leads to suffering just because there's a constant sense of holding on to, which comes from a fear of losing, which fear is a form of suffering. So the belief systems that we have about things being permanent and unchanging is another way that we suffer. Because in reality, everything is impermanent and everything does change. And when we encounter that, we're like, wait a minute. Why is this happening? I expected it to be like this forever. So that's basically the crux of why we suffer. And the practice is to recognize the ways wanting show up in our life, the ways not wanting show up in our life, and the ways that confusion show up in our life. Because when we can recognize it, we can let it go. And when we recognize it, we can start to develop a better habit of mind around it. So if 1,000 times we see, I want this, I want this, I want this, the wanting is leading me to this behavior, and this behavior leads to this, and it inevitably will show up as some form of suffering. If we're paying attention through mindful awareness, we start to notice over and over and over again. So that's a perfect segue to a story I was going to share.